Beneath the gilded domes of the world's most powerful palaces, Ottoman Istanbul, Mughal Delhi, and Qing Beijing, existed realms more secretive and tightly regulated than even the throne room, the imperial harems. To outsiders, they were places of eroticism and luxury. To those within, however, they were governed by an intricate web of rules, rules that had little to do with love and everything to do with control, politics, lineage, and survival. The bedroom in these courts was not just a place of intimacy, it was a battleground of influence, ambition, and royal legacy. The common perception of harems, shaped by Orientalist fantasies, imagines them as sensual paradises where beautiful women lounged around all day in silk garments, waiting for the emperor's touch. Reality was far more structured. Every act, gesture, and even breath a consort took was dictated by an unspoken code of protocol and obedience. From the moment a girl entered the harem, often as young as 6 or 7, her life became a chessboard, and the bed of the emperor was the final square. But few ever made it there. In the Ottoman imperial harem, based in the Topkapi Palace, the hierarchy was brutal and unbending. At the top stood the Validi Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, wielding more power than most viziers. Beneath her were the concubines, hundreds, sometimes thousands, each ranked and categorized based on their favor with the sultan and their potential to bear sons. Only a select few were ever invited to share the royal bed, and even then, it was under strict protocol. One of the most bizarre bedroom rules in the Ottoman harem was the silent summons. A concubine could not approach the sultan on her own. Instead, she had to wait for a eunuch to deliver a wordless message, the gift of a sash or a scented handkerchief. If a woman dared to initiate intimacy or try to seduce the sultan uninvited, she risked banishment or worse. The unspoken rule was clear. Even in the bedroom, the sultan must maintain the illusion of absolute control. Before any concubine could enter the sultan's chambers, she underwent hours of preparation. Cleanliness was paramount, not merely for hygiene, but for spiritual and symbolic purity. Bathing rituals could take upwards of 2 hours. Perfumes were applied strategically, hair styled intricately, and silks chosen to match the sultan's known preferences. In some cases, concubines were trained to remain utterly still during intimacy, believing that motion was reserved for the sultan alone, a sign of dominance. In China's Forbidden City, the Qing dynasty's imperial harem was even more rigid. The emperor, regarded as the son of heaven, had over 10,000 concubines across centuries, but interactions were limited by cosmic timing and precise bureaucratic scheduling. Sexual encounters were arranged through a ledger system kept by eunuchs. Each evening, wooden slips bearing the names of eligible concubines were presented to the emperor on a lacquered tray. He would select one or none. Once chosen, the concubine was stripped naked and wrapped in a yellow sheet, yellow being the imperial color, by eunuchs, then carried, yes, physically carried, to the emperor's bedroom to ensure she had no weapons or poisons. She was deposited at the foot of the bed and required to lie motionless until summoned by the emperor. If he did not call her to his side, she had to remain still until dawn and then be escorted out in silence. But perhaps the most haunting rule of all: no second chances. If a concubine failed to please the emperor, or worse, bored him, she was rarely summoned again. Many lived in luxurious isolation, never again touched or even acknowledged. In the imperial court, love was not earned. It was assigned. And once withdrawn, it disappeared like incense smoke in winter air. The Mughal harem, though slightly more romanticized in poetry, had its own labyrinth of rules. A Mughal emperor like Akbar or Shah Jahan could have hundreds of concubines and dozens of wives, but only a handful held true power. The harem was a fortress within a fortress, guarded by eunuchs and female warriors, and access to the emperor was highly restricted. Women vied for attention through poetry, dance, and gifts, yet even these expressions were tightly monitored. One of the more peculiar traditions was the star calendar. Emperors were advised by court astrologers to engage with certain concubines on specific days aligned with auspicious stars. A woman's physical availability depended not just on her health or desire, but on Jupiter's position. If a woman's stars aligned poorly, she might wait months or years to be selected. The bedchamber was not just about sex, it was about producing sons. Daughters were rarely celebrated. A concubine who bore a male heir often rose dramatically in rank, receiving jewels, slaves, and influence. This led to an internal war of fertility, women secretly consuming herbal mixtures, aphrodisiacs, and even engaging in political sabotage to improve their chances. The womb was a weapon, and the bed was its battlefield. But what happened after a royal encounter was just as tightly controlled. In many harems, women were examined by court matrons or midwives to verify if intercourse had taken place. In some cases, bed linens were inspected for signs of ejaculation, a grotesque intersection of privacy and politics. If a concubine became pregnant, she was immediately relocated to a special chamber, her movements restricted, her meals approved by testers. After all, an imperial heir was not just a child, it was a political asset. Meanwhile, those who failed to conceive were slowly pushed into lower quarters. Some were eventually married off to nobles, others remained trapped in golden cages until old age. In extreme cases, concubines who became politically inconvenient were poisoned or quietly suffocated, accidents that were never recorded. The harem's rules extended beyond the bedroom into dreams. Many concubines were forbidden to sleep with their backs to the emperor, believed to be a sign of disloyalty or disinterest. Others were required to sleep with eyes partially open as a show of vigilance and submission. Whispering during the night could be punished. Laughing in bed was considered disrespectful unless prompted by the emperor himself. And while it might seem these women were passive participants in a man's world, they learned to manipulate the system. Many rose through cunning, patience, and intrigue. Some even orchestrated the downfall of rivals through rumor, bribery, and the use of spies. The bedroom, then, was not only a place of strange rules, it was a silent arena of strategy. Even today, in the abandoned palaces and crumbling harems of the world, the echoes of these strange customs remain. Etched into walls, scribbled in private diaries, passed through folklore. They serve as a reminder. Beneath the silk sheets and behind the ivory screens, the imperial harem was less about romance and more about ruthless survival. And the bedroom, that was where the empire's most silent wars were fought, without swords, without blood, but with rules sharper than any blade. In the sprawling, perfumed palaces of ancient empires, where silk curtains veiled more than just light, and the air carried secrets heavier than incense, the imperial harem stood as a paradoxical institution. It was a place built for pleasure, but rooted in fear. While Chapter 1 unveiled the layers of hierarchy and ritual behind the bedroom rules, this chapter peels back the darker undercurrents, punishment for transgressions, taboo desires that threatened empires, and what happened when love dared to defy law. Though the harem was technically a realm of women, it was policed and penetrated, emotionally, politically, and physically, by men. Not just the emperor, but the black eunuchs, whose castration rendered them safe enough to serve as gatekeepers to female sanctity. But the harem was never truly safe. It was built on a foundation of possession, where the slightest breach of sexual protocol could lead to execution. One wrong glance from a male guard, one secret note exchanged with a servant, and a woman could find herself facing public shame or a private suffocation. Across multiple empires, one rule remained consistent. The emperor's body was sacred, and thus all intimacy with it was a matter of state. For a concubine to refuse a summons, whether due to illness, fear, or pregnancy, was seen not merely as personal disobedience, but as treason. There are recorded cases from China's Ming dynasty in which concubines who hesitated to engage with the emperor were flogged or starved until they complied. Others were dragged by eunuchs into bedchambers, their hair cropped as a symbol of dishonor. One of the darkest aspects of the harem world was the unspoken punishment for forbidden love. Despite extreme surveillance, the immense loneliness of harem life often bred hidden affairs with eunuchs, servants, or even other women. The Ottoman Empire maintained a brutal standard in this regard. Concubines caught engaging in sexual activity with anyone other than a sultan were often drowned in the Bosphorus, their bodies bound in velvet sacks, a horrifyingly symbolic nod to the fact that they had once been considered valuable, now discarded like tainted treasure. In the Forbidden City, punishments for breaking bedroom protocol were chillingly systematic. If a concubine or wife was caught attempting to seduce the emperor against custom, say, appearing in his path uninvited or wearing forbidden colors, she could be locked away in a cold palace for the remainder of her life. These stone cells were not prisons in a literal sense, but emotional oubliettes where the woman was isolated, denied visitors, and slowly forgotten. Many went mad within weeks. Some committed suicide using hairpins, a method so common it became taboo for concubines to sleep with hair ornaments. But while cruelty abounded, so did ritualized performance. Emperors did not engage in intimacy without an entire system of bureaucratic choreography. In some Mughal and Chinese harems, detailed sex registers were maintained. These documents recorded which woman was with the emperor on which night, the location, her physical condition, and, crucially, whether conception was likely. In some dynasties, a woman who bore two daughters without a son would be barred from further access to the emperor's chambers. Taboos extended even into the sounds of sex. In the Ottoman harem, it was considered deeply improper for a concubine to moan or speak during intercourse unless instructed. This was not out of modesty, but out of reverence. The belief was that the sultan, as God's shadow on earth, deserved a silent vessel, not a partner. In some periods, elaborate silk screens were placed between the sultan and his concubine so that he could enjoy her body without having to confront her humanity. And yet, women resisted. Whisper networks within the harem passed along forbidden knowledge about herbs to avoid pregnancy, about secret tunnels that led to the outside world, about eunuchs sympathetic to their plight. Some concubines penned poems, coded messages, or embroidered their grief into handkerchiefs. Others used the most powerful tool available to them, manipulation of affection. Take the case of Roxolana Hurrem Sultan, once a concubine. She rose to become the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. She broke nearly every tradition, refusing to be rotated out of the sultan's bed, bearing multiple children, and holding unprecedented political power. Her rivals were either exiled or found dead. She proved that within the restrictive web of harem rules, mastery was possible, but only for the cunning. In China, Empress Dowager Cixi, originally a low-ranking concubine, rose through seduction, strategy, and motherhood. Once she bore the emperor a son, her ascent was sealed. She eventually became the de facto ruler of the Qing dynasty, dictating foreign policy, military campaigns, and modernization efforts, all from behind a silk curtain. But even she had to first abide by the strange rules of submission before overturning them entirely. One of the most disturbing rituals found in some Chinese and Mughal courts was the purity inspection, especially during a woman's first encounter with the emperor. Court officials would inspect her virginity using invasive and degrading methods, believing that only untouched women could produce pure heirs. In many cases, These inspections were ceremonial rather than scientific, but the humiliation was deeply real. The woman, after enduring this scrutiny, was expected to seduce the emperor that same night with poise, silence, and perfect obedience. Another largely hidden rule was the requirement of emotional neutrality. A concubine was never to exhibit jealousy, sadness, or hope. To love the emperor was acceptable only in poetry, not in practice. If she showed despair at being replaced or joy at being summoned, she risked being labeled unstable. The perfect concubine was one who appeared grateful but indifferent, a delicate balancing act that broke many minds. Even the furnishings of the imperial bedchamber were bound by protocol. In Qing China, pillows embroidered with phoenixes could only be used by consorts above a certain rank. In the Mughal court, scented oils with ambergris or musk were reserved for high-ranking wives. A lowly concubine who mistakenly used such luxuries might be demoted or whipped. The bedroom was not a private space. It was a stage of ceremony, rank, and surveillance. Perhaps most shocking to modern readers is the reality that the emperor himself was not always free. He was bound by superstitions and laws of cosmic alignment. In many cases, he was prohibited from engaging in intercourse on days of eclipses, funerals, or during particular astrological transitions. A sultan who violated these rules might be blamed for famine, plague, or defeat in war. Thus, even the most powerful man in the empire sometimes found himself chained by the same invisible rules as his concubines. By the time a woman exited the emperor's bedchamber, if she ever did, the experience had marked her forever. Whether elevated, exiled, or erased, she would carry the memory of that night like a brand. For some, it was a ticket to unimaginable power. For others, it was the beginning of a lifelong punishment. And so, the imperial harem was not a sanctuary of romance or a garden of pleasure. It was a crucible where women were tested, ranked, and sacrificed at the altar of dynasty. The strange rules of the imperial bedroom were never about desire. They were about dynasty, legacy, and control, and in the quiet glow of candlelight, beneath silk sheets, and beneath history itself, they endured far longer than the empires that birthed them.